Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cody Leach podcast. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed my last episode, kind of an extended edition with all the Comic-Con news coming out because, man, we got a whole lot to talk about again today. The news is just steady dropping. Before I get into all the movie and TV news, I did want to give a special thanks to Abbott Skelding. If you guys are interested in listening to more podcasts other than my own, go and check out his podcast. It's called the Creative Cohorts Podcast. You can find it on iTunes and SoundCloud, and I believe it's on Podcast Addict and Podcast Republic as well if you have those apps on your phone. Very cool concept with Abbott's podcast. He had me on an episode that I think is going to be airing sometime next week, and pretty much he just interviews people with creative drives. Mine was, mostly focusing on music and my new venture into podcasting, but there's people on there who are artists of many different fields. So give his podcast a shot. Look out for my episode. I'll probably post a link for it somewhere on my page whenever it's released, and I'll go ahead and post his link for his podcast at the bottom of this episode as well. So give him a shot. And also, before I get into the news, I was going to kind of give an update on some of the ideas for some new shows that I've been kicking around. I have my Monday news episode that I do every single week, and I have my top 5 episode every single Wednesday, but I've still been kicking around a lot of ideas for another show that I can do regularly or semi-regularly. Now, I did the Off the Shelves episode, but like I said at the beginning of that one, that really is kind of a semi-regular episode because not a whole lot gets released on DVD and Blu-ray every single week, so that's probably going to be more of a monthly episode. Some other ideas I've been kicking around. I'm a big fan and a big passionate person when it comes to music. So at some point I'm going to try to do somewhat of a music news or music review, or just kind of talking about the state of today's music. And I think I'm going to be calling that show The Green Room. So look out for an episode of that once I get enough to kind of record an episode of. I'm also kind of a pretty big gamer here and there. I have my select games that I play. I don't play everything, and I'm not the kind of person that plays every game that comes out, and that's my main passion. It's just kind of a side hobby. So I think I'll do a video game focused episode here and there too, and I'm thinking about calling that one The Loading Screen. So if you're a video game fan, look out for The Loading Screen coming out sometime soon. And I don't really have a cool name for it yet, but I'm going to do some movie reviews off of movies that are like viewers' choice. So I'll either post something on Facebook or something on here, or somebody can talk to me on Twitter and say, hey, I want you to review this movie. It could be old, it can be new, and I'm going to do a show, once in a while, like some kind of like a revisit review or, something like that. I do have one request from my cousin to review The Gate. It's an old 80s horror movie that a lot of you probably aren't familiar with, but it's a pretty cool movie that, was a pretty big part of our childhood. So look out for that one. Will be a first episode of that coming out. All right, guys, moving into the news. So the first piece of news that, it's been kicked around for about the past 4 or 5 days. I did my Star Trek Beyond review, and it's on my channel. You can go ahead and check that out. And go ahead and check out Star Trek Beyond in theaters. And now it's a very cool movie. But right about the time that movie got released, J.J. Abrams came out and said that he has no plans to recast the character of Chekov. So for everybody that knows, I've talked about it a few times on these episodes, being that I've reviewed some of the things that this guy has done. Anton Yelchin, we lost him about a month ago to a pretty bizarre, tragic accident. And he plays the character of Chekov in this new J.J. Abrams universe of the Star Trek movies. So, they were asking J.J. Abrams in interviews, what are you going to do about Chekov in the movies to come? And J.J. Abrams pretty much said that there's no replacing him. He said there's no recasting, and I can't possibly imagine doing that, and I think Anton deserves better. So he wouldn't disclose if the next Star Trek movie would include like the death of Chekov's character, or having just him be on a different ship or something like that. It's probably too early for him to say, but I don't really agree with not recasting Chekov. First of all, all due respect to Anton Yelchin. I'm a big fan of that guy. I've liked pretty much everything he's been in. He's a huge loss to movies. But the character is always bigger than the actor. You know what I mean? Even if Chris Pine, who's the main character of the movies, playing Captain Kirk, even if he died, they would obviously have to recast that character. So I don't see what the difference is with Chekov. Chekov is always kind of a minor character, but it's never good to betray the character and all the fans of that character by saying, okay, so because this actor that played him for all of about, we'll say in 3 movies, maybe 20, 25 minutes of screen time over 3 movies, because that actor has passed away, that we're just going to stop, we're going to stop writing fiction for this character that you all love. And, I'm not a super hardcore Star Trek fan. I'm more of a casual fan. I used to watch all the Star Trek Next Generation movies with my dad. I've seen all these new ones. I've seen a few of the older movies and a few episodes of the original series. So I'm more of a casual Star Trek fan. But I got to imagine people who are like hardcore Trekkies got to be upset about that, because even though I'm sure there's not very many people out there that don't like Anton Yelchin's take on that character, he's not the first actor to play Chekov, and he shouldn't be the last one. So, all due respect to J.J. Abrams, I'm sure it's something that it's probably difficult to talk about. I mean, it's when you spend that much amount of time with somebody and then you lose them, it's very hard to start talking about how you're going to replace that person. So, I mean, I understand his hesitation to talk about it, but, I think they need to go ahead and recast him for the next movie. But when they do that, I wouldn't be a big fan of them just killing off the character or just, stopping the fiction for that character. Pacific Rim 2. So I've talked about this movie a couple of times with, the story direction that it's going, and, they added John Boyega to the cast, and that Stephen DeKnight, the showrunner for the first season of Daredevil, was making this movie while Guillermo del Toro stepped away to do other things. But they just finally announced that, even though we probably already assumed this, that Charlie Hunnam, the star from the first one, is not going to be returning to Pacific Rim 2. Apparently the movie changed studios and changed hands a few times, and now that it's in the home that it is, they were given a much more aggressive shooting schedule, and it conflicted with what Charlie Hunnam is already scheduled to do. So he's not going to be returning for Pacific Rim 2, which is kind of good and kind of bad. I love Charlie Hunnam in Sons of Anarchy, and I did enjoy Pacific Rim, but I don't think that he's necessarily the reason why I enjoyed Pacific Rim, and I don't think that he's the reason that the majority of people are going to see Pacific Rim or will go to see the sequel. You go to see Pacific Rim because you want to see robots beat the fuck out of aliens. So I don't think it's a huge loss. I think Charlie Hunnam needs to go off and do some other things. This King Arthur movie he's doing looks pretty cool, and I'd like to see him do some more stuff besides getting stuck into a franchise. So I'm not too upset about that. But Pacific Rim 2, look out for that. It's supposed to be coming out February 23rd. Alden Ehrenreich. So this is the guy who they just cast as the young Han Solo. And they have just released the information that he is signed to do 3 Star Wars movies at least. And the rumor right now is that Disney and Lucasfilm is kicking around the possibility of doing a young Han Solo trilogy. Obviously, that's going to depend on the success of the first movie and how everybody, receives Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo, being that everybody loves Harrison Ford so much. Now, the weird thing about this, and the thing that I don't like about it, when they came out saying that Disney had purchased Lucasfilm, George Lucas was stepping away, and that they were going to be, kicking off some additional Star Wars saga films, starting off with, The Force Awakens, which was phenomenal to me. And then they were going to be doing, they'll do a saga one year, and then in the years in between the main story, they're going to be doing a lot of side stories. And you have Star Wars Rogue One coming out this Christmas. And, they've been kicking around ideas for like a Boba Fett movie, Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, or a Knights of the Old Republic movie. I mean, there is ungodly amounts of story and characters that they could do movies with. And that being said, I don't like the fact, if it is true, that they're going to be focusing so much time and energy and money on just keeping with characters that we already have seen so much from. A young Han Solo movie, I think, is going to be really good, especially since it's being directed by Lord and Miller. These are the guys that brought us the 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, and the Lego Movie. Those guys are awesome. And I think that their style and their humor could do wonders for a young Han Solo story. But I don't want to see 3 movies of it. You know what I mean? If young Han Solo is going to be in some of these side stories, like if he just shows up as a character once in a while, then that's cool. But I don't like the fact that they have all this freedom now, and they're just going to be shrinking the Star Wars universe and only telling stories on people that we've already got stories from. Start branching off and doing some things that we haven't seen. Bring us something new. So that's my take on all that. But like I said, that is a rumor, and we can look forward to seeing what Alden Ehrenreich is doing And May 25th, 2018 is when they're supposed to be begin shooting. Or I'm sorry, no, that's when the movie's going to be released. They're going to begin shooting this January. So May 25th, look out for the young Han Solo movie. Suicide Squad, which comes out in a week. Cannot wait to see it. There is a huge rumor that has been cycling around Jared Leto's Joker pretty much from the beginning of the time that they started seeing pictures of Jared Leto's take on the Joker come out. And David Ayer, I believe this was at Comic-Con, if not, it was shortly after, he shot down this rumor and ended it finally. Which I'm glad, because not that it was the worst rumor in the world, but I'm glad that it's no longer something that we have to wait to see in the movie because it worried a lot of people. So the rumor was that Jared Leto's Joker is actually Jason Todd. Now, for those that aren't real up on the Batman lore, Jason Todd was the second Robin. You know, the first Robin was Dick Grayson, and he's the one that we saw in a few of the older movies, but he's the one who ends up turning into Nightwing and going to Bloodhaven and doing his own thing. And then the second Robin that Batman brought in was Jason Todd. And Jason Todd in the comic books was not a very popular Robin. He was very roguish, very dick-headed, and a lot of people did not care for him as a character. Now, they had kind of like a poll back in the 80s saying, you know, you call this number and you push this button if you want to kill Jason Todd in the newest comic, and you push this button if you want Jason Todd to survive. And I think it was like 70 or 80% chose to kill him. So then they came out with this comic book storyline called A Death in the Family. And it ended with the Joker beating Jason Todd almost to death with a crowbar and then leaving him to be blown up. Pretty gruesome. And Jason Todd has returned in various incarnations. You know, he returned as the Red Hood. He returned in the Arkham games as Arkham Knight. And, you know, he's come back in various incarnations. And for some reason, people have looked at pictures of Jared Leto and like the locations of his tattoos, and people swear that they see a Robin on him somewhere, and they've looked at, you know, blown up pictures of that one single shot that we got of Robin's armor in Batman v Superman, and everybody started running with it saying, I bet you Jared Leto's Joker is actually Jason Todd. Which wasn't really the craziest rumor in the world. It wasn't so out of left field like some people made it, because like I said, Jason Todd has returned in various incarnations as a threat to Batman. So that would be an interesting change for some Batman lore. And the reason that I didn't really like it was because I prefer the Joker that does not have a backstory. You know, as much as I like the backstory, like in The Killing Joke, the comic, the Joker is always scarier and more interesting and more intriguing when you don't know why he's the Joker. That's what was so brilliant about Heath Ledger and the choices that Christopher Nolan made in that script, with keeping, you know, the teasing his origin but never giving you a solid answer of actually why he's so crazy. So I'm much more of a fan of keeping the Joker mysterious. So I'm glad that David Ayer came out. You know, he was being interviewed. Somebody asked him about it, and he just pointed at the camera and said, it ain't the case. He's not. So now, yes, there is always the possibility that David Ayer is just kind of playing deflection. You know, J.J. Abrams is famous for that. He did it with Star Trek Into Darkness. Everybody said, hey, man, is Benedict Cumberbatch playing Khan? No, he's not playing Khan. And then he ended up being Khan. So, yes, there's always the possibility that David Ayer's doing that, but I don't think David Ayer is the type of director to be playing that game. You know what I mean? That's kind of J.J. Abrams' MO. I don't see David Ayer doing that. So, Jared Leto's Joker, for what it seems, he's not Jason Todd. Going back to Star Trek Beyond. So, a deleted scene, they're coming out saying a deleted scene from Star Trek Beyond actually featured a kiss between Sulu and his husband upon return from the opening mission. So for those that, you know, I spoke about it in a movie news episode a few weeks ago, and for those that listened to my Star Trek Beyond review, one of my few negatives of that movie was that the decision to make a storyline out of Sulu coming out as a homosexual character, I don't feel like they did it well. You know what I mean? I'd never really had a problem with them doing that. I kind of felt it was more of a not quite a parody, but they were doing it for the fact just because George Takei played him for so long. And to me, I always am of the opinion if you're going to try to do that in a movie, you should always make a new character. Don't just change the character that everybody already knows so much about just for the sake of saying, yeah, we did something different. Because, like I said, in the movie, it just really went nowhere. You know, it was in two scenes. They came spoiler alert, I guess. It's not really that much of a spoiler for Star Trek Beyond, but they show it in 2 scenes. At the beginning of the movie, they come back from a mission at the beginning, and, everybody's coming off the ship, and Sulu walks towards this little girl who you presume is his daughter, and walks away with his hand on this gentleman's back, and you just have to assume pretty much that that's his husband or his lover. And you don't hear any conversation between them. You don't hear any conversation between Sulu or any of the crew of the Enterprise about it. It's not like this big revelation, everybody just kind of moves on about their life. And then the very end of the movie, whenever everybody's celebrating Captain Kirk's birthday, it shows a little quick camera cut over to Sulu, and he's just standing next to this guy with, his hand on his back. And that's as far as they did with the story. They didn't make Sulu have any extra motivation to get back to, this Yorktown place. They didn't have any extra motivation for him to defeat the villain, to save his husband or anything like that. I mean, they didn't really do anything with it. So they have a deleted scene that obviously is playing into what I said about the scene in the beginning of the movie with them coming off the ship. So instead of him just putting his hand on this guy's back, it actually shows a kiss. So more definitively saying, yes, Sulu is a gay character, and yes, this is his husband or lover, instead of just kind of letting you assume it had you not already read the news. And they're saying that it was omitted due to studio decision. Now, obviously this is kind of a spark for controversy, but they didn't really get into what the studio decision was, and I think it was because they realized that Sulu and his husband actually play absolutely no part in the story whatsoever. It was just kind of written in there just to kind of have it's almost like a wink. It has really no gravity or no weight in the movie whatsoever. So I think they admitted it just for the sake of not bringing more attention to how pointless that storyline was. Now, they also had attached to that article was, Paul Feig apparently was coming out and saying that Kate McKinnon's character in Ghostbusters was also supposed to be gay, but he was kind of playing coy in an interview and saying subtly that she was not because of studio interference. And again, some people will take offense to that and say, oh, they just don't want gay characters in movies, and I don't think that has anything to do with it. If I could think of them putting that into Ghostbusters, unless they had a lot more storyline with Kate McKinnon's character that they cut and left on the cutting room floor, that would have just stuck out like a sore thumb for absolutely no reason. That there's really no relationships in the Ghostbusters movie, unless you count Kristen Wiig's crush on Chris Hemsworth, but they don't show any relationships or husbands or boyfriends or anything for any of the characters. So it's not like Kate McKinnon's character just got the short end of the stick. But anyway, I'll move on from that, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting piece of news. Lupita Nyong'o has revealed some plot details for Black Panther. So this is the actress who, I believe she won the Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, and she also played Maz Kanata in The Force Awakens, and she's going to be playing a character in this Black Panther movie coming up. And she revealed that, some of the story is basically that the leadership of T'Challa, who's Black Panther, is threatened by 2 foes who come together. So T'Challa enlists the help of the CIA and the Dora Milaje to defeat the enemy. So pretty basic premise. I mean, I think anybody that knows anything about Black Panther, which is, I don't know too much aside from what I learned from Civil War, they could have probably figured out that that was going to be pretty much the basic storyline. I mean, that's a basic origin story. And everybody's kind of speculating who these 2 foes are going to be. Well, they've already announced that Michael B. Jordan was going to be playing Killmonger, who, from what I read, is basically Black Panther's main nemesis. So you can go ahead and assume that at some point he's going to be one of those foes. And the other one that a lot of people are either forgetting about or didn't realize was a Black Panther character is Ulysses Klaue. Now, this is the guy played by Andy Serkis who showed up in that one scene in Avengers Age of Ultron. And he's a pretty big villain in the Black Panther universe, so you can only assume that he's the second villain. So anybody who's confused about that, that's pretty much going to be your 2 villains as far as I can almost guarantee. Killmonger and Ulysses Klaue is going to be taking on the Black Panther in the Black Panther movie. Jessica Chastain is joining Jake Gyllenhaal in Ubisoft's The Division movie. So about 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, Jake Gyllenhaal came out saying that he is signed on to produce and star in this Division movie. Now, The Division was this really big, hyped Ubisoft game that came out about 4 or 5 months ago. And I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I was really bought into it from the beta. The beta was genius, the way that they kind of they gave you literally about 3% of that game, and it was just enough to get you hooked into playing it and want to explore further, because there's certain parts of this world that was just pretty much cut off in the beta, so just give you a little chunk of the game. And I bought the game, and once I got past all the ridiculous glitches and bugs and everything that plagued that game for like the first 2 or 3 days it came out, then I could actually play the damn thing. And just to me, the game just got really boring quick. It got very redundant. But Ubisoft, now that they're kind of putting in all this money into this movie side of their video game division, being that it was one of the most financially successful games in a very, very long time, I think it might have even been, don't quote me on it, but I think I even read an article saying that was Ubisoft's most financial successful game so far. Obviously, they're going to fast track a movie on it. Now, the problem with this, and aside from the fact that Jake Gyllenhaal and Jessica Chastain are both awesome actors, the problem that I see is that, the basic plot and story of the game is very similar to way too many other movies that we've already seen. The premise of the game is basically just that this virus has wiped out a lot of humanity, and the division is basically these kind of like freedom fighters or soldiers that are left somewhat policing what is left of New York. And, that sounds very similar to a lot of post-apocalyptic kind of movies that we've seen. So they're going to have to do a lot to make this movie stand out, aside from just riding the financial success of the game. And really, Ubisoft, granted the movie hasn't come out yet, so I could end up liking it. Ubisoft really lost my confidence in their movies with all those comments that they came out with saying about their Assassin's Creed movie about, well, we know Assassin's Creed's not going to make a whole lot of money, but this is more marketing for Assassin's Creed. So that told me that you've already seen the movie, you know it sucks, but the only silver lining that you see coming out of it is that for the 4 people out there that don't already play Assassin's Creed games, you're going to get, 4 more copies sold. So not a whole lot of confidence in the Division movie, but I'm hoping that since Jake Gyllenhaal is signed on, that he must have seen something in there that could be something really cool. So look out for the Division movie. Joss Whedon has come out saying that he would come back to Marvel Studios to direct another Marvel movie if it was a Black Widow movie. So Joss Whedon is a very, very big name in Hollywood. He was big in, I think he was over the Buffy the Vampire Slayer and a lot of big TV shows out there. And he directed the 2 Avengers movies. The first one being one of the best Marvel movies and one of the best superhero movies ever. And I'm a big fan of the second one. I know it kind of gets a lot of hate, but I will agree it's not as good as the first one. But, being that he had so much trouble with Avengers Age of Ultron with studio pressure and, fan pressure and shooting schedules and the studio coming in and saying, no, you have to put this in here, you have to squeeze this in your movie, you have to take this out, and all that kind of stuff. He pretty much, in a lot of interviews towards the end of that marketing cycle of that movie, he pretty much said that he's going to be stepping away from Marvel Studios, and he's not going to be directing any more of these huge Marvel movies. And, he was just, you could tell just by looking at the guy, he was just physically beaten down. So it's interesting to hear that he would come back to Marvel Studios, and the reason that he's saying that a Black Widow movie is the one that would hold his interest enough to come back is that he likes the character. Obviously, he's made 2 movies with her. He likes the character and thinks that she would allow him to do kind of a gritty spy thriller in the vein of what, the Russo brothers have done with the Captain America movies. And that's something that could be really cool and different for Joss Whedon. And, they've been kicking around the idea of a Black Widow movie for quite some time, and they haven't announced anything yet. But I think they could do something really cool with that. Obviously, she's a really cool character. She works great as a side character. She was one of the best parts of Captain America Civil War and a lot more. And definitely one of the best parts of Captain America Winter Soldier. So she could hold her own movie, and obviously Scarlett Johansson is a big financial draw, just putting her name on the movie. So I think that they'll eventually have a Black Widow movie, whether or not Joss Whedon does it or not. But Joss Whedon, I think, would do a good job with that. So I'd be interested to see if he actually does direct that. Lights Out. So this is the big horror movie that came out this past Friday, and me and Holly have a review of it on my channel if you want to go check that out. They're already greenlighting a sequel, so surprise, surprise, successful horror movie gets a sequel. You know, the movie had a $5 million budget, and just on that 1 week, it already made $22 million. So you know it's going to have legs, it's going to stick around, and they've already, quadrupled their budget. So pretty no question that they were going to greenlight a sequel to that. Now, the only thing that I'm worried about with that, whenever they rush out to do a sequel of anything, horror movie or anything, I worry about them just kind of churning out some bullshit script, just keeping the character or the monster and just kind of having an excuse to put Lights Out on a poster again. But hopefully, being that this is under James Wan's production, he won't let that happen. But then again, we got Annabelle. So Sandberg, who's the director of Lights Out, and he was the director of the short film that it's based off on, is supposed to return to direct, which is good news because he did a really good job. And Wan is supposed to return to produce. So like I said, I'm hoping that he's going to keep it pretty close and not going to let them, run away and destroy it. And there's no story concepts yet. They're still mulling over concepts for the sequel. So look out for a Lights Out sequel. Netflix has come out saying that they are planning on ramping up production of their Marvel shows. So the exact quote of one of the Netflix execs is, "I doubt that we could produce at the quality that they produce at that speed, but we're going to try to make them quicker so we can get less downtime between them." So a little hard to understand out of concept, but from what I understand, somebody was basically asking, hey, do you want to start, are you ever going to start, churning out these shows to keep up with all the other shows out there where we get, seasons all year long and everything like that. So he's pretty much saying that, hey, we can't make them at the quality that we're making them by just kind of rushing them out there, but we're going to try to get them out there a little bit quicker. So it's not exactly a concrete statement saying, yes, you're going to be getting Marvel shows more often, but it's pretty optimistic saying that, okay, we know the success of these shows, we know that everybody wants them, so we're going to try to get them out sooner than what we've done. For the most part, they've been having them once a year, so you'll probably start to see more. Once they get Luke Cage out there and Iron Fist out there and then the Defenders, you'll see, more seasons of the Daredevil, more seasons of Jessica Jones. They already announced the Punisher series, so even if we don't see a season of Daredevil every single year, I think there's going to be plenty of other stuff to keep us busy waiting for those. And I definitely don't want them to start rushing. So I like the guys' comments, and I think that they're on a good little momentum with their Netflix shows. So, all right, speaking to some of these old school horror fans, Phantasm Remastered. So the original Phantasm is a movie that came out in 1979. It's directed by Don Coscarelli. One of my favorite horror movies growing up. Not one that a lot of people know of and have seen, but it's a classic. So they've been working on this 4K remaster, which I believe J.J. Abrams has kind of had his hand dipped in it for a while. They finally completed it, and it's going to be released on September 24th. And Phantasm Ravager, which has been this long-awaited fifth and supposedly final installment, being that we don't have Angus Scrimm to play the tall man anymore, he passed away. So, supposedly final installment of Phantasm, it's going to be released on October 7th. So, I don't think that's going to be a theatrical release. They might do some limited here and there. I think these are all VOD release dates. So, Phantasm being remastered is awesome news because I've been waiting for that to hit Blu-ray for years. The only one that's out there right now is Phantasm 2, which is also good, but I love the original. And Phantasm Ravager I've been waiting for a long time because the fourth one, Phantasm Oblivion, it kind of created more questions than it answered. It started to really expand the Phantasm lore and the universe, and everybody was waiting for all these questions to be answered since that movie came out years ago. I think it was like 1994. Maybe 1996, but I mean, it's been a long, long ass time since that movie came out. And supposedly Ravager answers a lot of these questions, but it's been made for a while, and it's just been sitting on the shelf for a couple of years. That movie has went through absolute hell trying to find a distributor. So I'm glad to hear that they're finally releasing that damn thing. And they also have come out saying that, Phantasm Remastered and the HD restorations of both Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead, which is probably my least favorite of all of them, and Phantasm Oblivion will be released on cable and digital platforms while the remastered is released, and then at some point later in the year, they're all going to be released individually on Blu-ray and DVD and in a collector's edition set. So, yeah, I'll be getting that collector's edition set, you can believe that. So, for the few of you Phantasm fans out there, those are really good news. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, download or find on VOD somewhere the original Phantasm, or wait till September 24th and watch the remastered. It's a really, really cool, old school, kind of a science fiction horror movie. And the second one's pretty cool too. And you can find them on DVD, so you can do that too if you want to go on Amazon and pick up the DVD. But check out Phantasm. It's a really good old school horror movie. Moving on to a little TV news. So the Duffer Brothers have said that more Stranger Things will be coming, but it's going to be in more of the form of a sequel rather than a season 2. So a little bit confusing, but I'm going to try to kind of reinterpret what they say and kind of explain it my own way. So for those that have read or have listened to me and Holly's review of Stranger Things season 1, this is one of the best things that we have seen on TV in a long time. And for me, at least, it's my favorite thing that Netflix has come out with yet. Very, very cool throwback, kind of a love letter to anybody that loves 80s movies and loves Spielberg movies and loves, Stephen King and John Carpenter. I mean, all those things is kind of wrapped up into one show. So I can't say anything negative about the show at all. I mean, there's no more praise that I can give Stranger Things. If you have Netflix, definitely go check it out and check out our review. It is spoiler free, so it's not going to be ruining anything for you. But for the most part, what I can tell for what they're saying of it being a sequel and not a season 2 is that they're going to be the same characters. It's going to be the same setting, but it's going to involve somewhat of a time jump. So it's not going to pick up like moments after season 1 ends like some second seasons will. It's going to be, like a sequel to a movie where you come back to the same characters, but it's been a year or 2 years or whatever. So I think it's going to be more along the lines of somewhat like Harry Potter, being that they have the most of the focus on the show is on this cast of kids. These kids are going to grow quick. So with every season, they're probably going to look a year older. Their voice is going to drop. They're going to be hitting puberty. The hair's going to change. So they can't expect to have these kids look exactly the same and have you suspend your disbelief that it's a day later, yet they look like they've aged 2 years. So I think that's all they're saying with that. But, anything saying that they're making a season 2 with those characters, I'm up for whatever the hell they want to do. Just bring it now. Bring me more Stranger Things. HBO is saying that True Detective Season 3 is still a strong possibility. So they're talking about keeping Nick Pizzolatto, who is the guy who created the show, as the head, but bringing in a new writer. So for anybody who's not familiar with True Detective, so the first season came out on HBO, and it was kind of this thing that happened out of nowhere. And it had Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson playing detectives over this 10-year period trying to solve this ritual murder. And True Detective Season 1 was one of the best 8 hours of television you're going to find. I mean, that show is phenomenal. And being that it was so successful and so critically acclaimed, they tried to rush a Season 2. And Season 2 came out starring Colin Farrell, Vince Vaughn, Taylor Kitsch, and Rachel McAdams. And I did not watch True Detective Season 2. I got through one episode, really didn't like what I was seeing. I had no interest whatsoever. I mean, I think I was checking my phone every 5 minutes. I was so fucking bored. And I was even more hesitant to even continue watching the show after I started seeing the reviews, after everybody had seen the full season. And pretty much across the board, everyone was just trashing on True Detective Season 2. I mean, they weren't just saying that it wasn't as good as Season 1. They were just saying that it was just flat out bad. So they've kind of pumped the brakes on True Detective for a while. Now, me personally, I think they should have just left it alone with that one season. I don't think everything is necessary to make an anthology series. There's no problems with having just a standalone. Okay, True Detective was that one thing that came out once. It was 8 episodes, and it was phenomenal. And then that's all it was. You don't have to make everything into American Horror Story. But like I said, since it's so financially successful, even the second season was financially successful, they're going to still try to crank out a Season 3. They're just taking more time to make sure that, hopefully, it's a lot better than what they gave us in Season 2. And the president of HBO also came out and said that he blames himself for putting too much pressure on Pizzolatto to churn out a Season 2 quickly. So after the success of Season 1, he just kind of wanted to crank out another season as quickly as possible, and then we got what we got. So look forward to hearing who's going to star in it and what they're going to do if they do go on with the Season 3. I just hope that they put more more love and care into it than they did with that second season. Besson has been found guilty of plagiarizing the plot of Escape from New York in his 2012 movie Lockout. So for those that didn't see Lockout, it's not a great movie, but it is kind of a guilty pleasure little action movie. It starred Guy Pearce, and it was pretty much, like it says, the plot of Escape from New York, but in space. And I didn't even know about this, but John Carpenter saw the movie, and he's been suing Luc Besson for plagiarizing his plot of his movie. And apparently he was found guilty. So he is ordered to pay John Carpenter $500,000 for ripping off Escape from New York. I guess whoever wrote Point Break is kicking themselves in the ass right now for not suing the Fast and the Furious. But anybody that hasn't seen Escape from New York, by the way, definitely check that out. It should be on Netflix or Amazon Instant Video, and it is on various versions of Blu-ray, but it's a really cool movie with Kurt Russell. So check that one out if you haven't seen it. Alright, the long-awaited Uncharted movie is now changed hands once again. Joe Carnahan is being brought in to write the still-in-development Uncharted movie. He's not going to be directing this one due to his scheduling conflicts with Bad Boys 3, but he is being brought in to write it. So Joe Carnahan is a pretty cool director. He came on the scene, I believe, with Smokin' Aces, and he did the A-Team, which was actually a pretty cool little action movie, and probably my favorite movie of his was that Liam Neeson movie, The Grey, about the wolves. So Joe Carnahan is a really good writer and director. And as much as I want to get excited about this, I'm kind of sick of hearing about this Uncharted movie. Uncharted is one of my favorite video game series ever, and I think that they could really do a great movie off of that. He's kind of like a new age Indiana Jones. And I think Joe Carnahan would be a good choice for it, but I've heard this movie has went through so many different hands. At first David O. Russell was supposed to be doing it, and he was going to have Danny DeVito and Joe Pesci play in it, and Mark Wahlberg was supposed to play Nathan Drake, and then everybody was getting pissed off because they were creating new characters instead of keeping with the characters of Elena and Sully, and then they were approaching Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg at one point, which was an interesting choice, and then the Zero Dark 30 writer was attached to it, and then, for the last that I've heard, the Horrible Bosses director, Seth Gordon, was supposed to be doing this. But, I guess now he's left it. So now Joe Carnahan is the new guy supposed to be doing it. Now, if they do stick with this, and they don't change it, and there's no studio and director and writer problems, and they actually start working on this fucking thing, I think Joe Carnahan could give us something really cool. So looking forward to seeing if that actually gets out of this development hell it's in. I think the Uncharted games deserve a movie. So looking forward to seeing that. Alright guys, moving on to trailer talk. I actually got quite a few this week. I was surprised that we had so many after Comic-Con. I figured that Comic-Con would drop the majority of them, but we've had a steady little drop of them. So first up is Split, which is coming out January in 2017. Now this is M. Night Shyamalan's newest movie. This is the famous or infamous, depending on how you look at him, director of Sixth Sense and Signs and, The Happening and The Last Airbender, and his most recent movie was The Visit, which was it was okay, was decent. And it's going to be starring James McAvoy. So the basic plot of this, from what I can tell from the trailer, is that this guy, played by James McAvoy, kidnaps these 3 girls, holds them in a basement, and while they're in captivity, they start to realize that this kidnapper has multiple personalities. So, kind of a basic setup. It looks very strange. It looks very M. Night Shyamalan-ish. And really, if I do see this, I'm not going to see it in theaters. Because not only is it kind of a red flag that it's coming out in January, but I don't support M. Night Shyamalan in the theater anymore. He lost all my confidence. But if I do end up seeing it, if I download it later on, or if I, end up buying the Blu-ray or whatever, if I hear some good things about it, it's only going to be to see what James McAvoy can do. He's a really cool actor. I like what he does in the X-Men movies a lot, and he looks very strange and kooky and maybe a little bit creepy in this trailer. However, being that M. Night Shyamalan is Mr. I have to shove a plot twist into everything, I can watch this trailer and pretty much gather what my idea of the twist is going to be. So go ahead and skip to the next one if you, for whatever reason, if you're like super psyched to go see Split and you don't want anybody maybe ruining the ending for you. But from what I can tell from this trailer, it looks to me like these 3 girls are just going to end up being other personalities in this guy's head, and it's all going to be just James McAvoy sitting alone in a room thinking up all this crap. So if that is the case, I don't think it's going to be a very good movie. I mean, M. Night Shyamalan's kind of a joke anymore. But if you are a fan of his out there, you got something to look forward to in January. So look out for Split. Bad Santa 2. Now, I didn't even know this was coming out. So this is a tiny little teaser that they just dropped. And this movie is going to be coming out November 23rd of 2017. And it was literally just like a little 40-second teaser thrown together, so there's not a whole lot of idea what the story is going to be, aside from it's saying that it's basically Billy Bob and his mom trying to con a charity out of money. And I'll be honest, I was one of the only people out there that wasn't a big fan of Bad Santa. You know, it's one of those movies to me that they use, and it sounds really like a funny criticism coming from me, but to me that movie was ruined by just shoving cuss words and F-bombs and everything into like every other sentence where it didn't need to be. You know what I mean? It was just distracting to a degree where every other word was a cuss word. So to me, from what I remember, I'd have to watch the movie again because I haven't seen it since it first came out, but from what I remember, that was my main deterrent from that movie, really, from caring for it very much. I remember it having a few funny parts. I remember Billy Bob Thornton being really funny, but I was never on the Bad Santa train. But for the majority of you who are, Bad Santa 2 you have coming out. You know, the teaser pretty much just showed him snoring in his Santa outfit, so it looks like you're going to get just kind of more of the same. Now, the only thing that would be worrisome for this, for those of you who are looking for it, is that pretty much all of these long-awaited comedy sequels that they've been coming out the past year or so, they've all pretty much sucked. I mean, it's been almost 14 years since Bad Santa, and you know, Dumb and Dumber 2 sucked, Zoolander 2 sucked, and this has a possibility of doing that, but, you know, we could get something surprising. It's going to be directed by Mark Waters, who's the Mean Girls director. So look out for Bad Santa 2, November 23rd, 2017. Another Christmas comedy was Office Christmas Party, which is going to be coming out December 9th of this year. Now, this is directed by Guyman Cassidy, and it stars Jason Bateman, T.J. Miller, Kate McKinnon, Courtney B. Vance, and Jennifer Aniston. Now, the trailer, it's either doing one of two things. They're either holding back a lot of their best laughs, or this movie's not going to be all that funny. It looked like they had a few funny parts here and there. I mean, T.J. Miller had a couple of funny parts in the trailer. There's a funny scene where I think it was Courtney B. Vance is swinging off of these Christmas lights and slams into a file cabinet that was pretty damn funny. But, you know, it's really hard to judge comedy trailers anymore because I'm one of the biggest complainers about trailers showing way too much. You know, I can't stand it when I go see a comedy or a horror movie, especially where I feel like all the best scares and all the best jokes I already know walking into the movie. So, on one hand, like I said, they could be holding back all their big guns for the movie, which would be great. But from what I can gather from this trailer, this is probably something I'm either going to wait to see. You know, if reviews come out and everybody's saying how hilarious it is, I'll go see it. But if this is a movie that just kind of gets a lukewarm response, I might watch it when it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray. But for the most part, it looks decent. But December 9th, Office Christmas Party. Now, moving on to a movie that I cannot wait to see, you have The Accountant, coming out October 14th of this year. Now, this is directed by Gavin O'Connor, who directed one of my favorite movies ever, Warrior. And it is starring Ben Affleck, Anna Kendrick, J.K. Simmons, John Lithgow, and John Bernthal. Now, the story of The Accountant is Christian Wolff, played by Affleck, is a mathematics savant with more affinity for numbers than people. Using a small-town CPA office as a cover, he makes his living as a freelance accountant for dangerous criminal organizations. With a treasury agent, played by J.K. Simmons, hot on his heels, Christian takes on a state-of-the-art robotics company as a legitimate client. As Wolf gets closer to the truth about a discrepancy that involves millions of dollars, the body count starts to rise. So this trailer has a really interesting setup. But to me, aside from the fact that I love Ben Affleck, the story looks really intriguing. It looks kind of like something... It looks almost like in the vein of Affleck's Bourne Identity or something like that. It looks like he's going to be kicking some ass and killing some people here and there. It looks like it's going to be more of a... He looks a lot like Clive Owen's character in the first Bourne Identity. But, you know, the main draw for this movie, I mean, this has got a phenomenal cast. I mean, you know, like I said, I love Ben Affleck. Anna Kendrick is quickly coming up there as a really good actress. J.K. Simmons is the shit. John Lithgow is fucking phenomenal, and John Bernthal is the man. So, from what I can tell, John Bernthal is going to be like a guy trying to hunt down Ben Affleck. So just Ben Affleck and John Bernthal going after each other is enough to sell me on this movie, but it looks really, really cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing this. October 14th, look out for The Accountant. Hell or High Water. Now, this is more of like an indie movie, and it's supposed to come out August 12th, so not too long from now. It's directed by David Mackenzie, and it stars Chris Pine, Ben Foster, and Jeff Bridges. And the story is a divorced dad and his ex-con brother plan a bank robbery to save their family's West Texas farm from foreclosure, while 2 Texas Rangers are set to catch both brothers. So, pretty basic setup, but the trailer makes it look like it's going to be something really dark and gritty and cool. And you don't get Jeff Bridges attached to something that's not good. I mean, that guy's an Oscar winner. He's been nominated for numerous Oscars. I mean, Jeff Bridges is awesome. Chris Pine I'm a big fan of, and Ben Foster is one of the most underrated actors out there. That guy just dives in and he's a freaking chameleon. So those 3 names alone has got me interested, but the trailer makes it look like we got something pretty cool on our hands. So look out for Hell or High Water. Masterminds. Now, this is a movie that I have seen advertised, I swear, like 3 or 4 times over the past year and a half. And I did a little bit of research, so it's been going through development hell getting released. So that explains why. But this is directed by Jared Hess, who directed, Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre. And this stars Zach Galifianakis, Kristen Wiig, Leslie Jones, Kate McKinnon, Owen Wilson, and Jason Sudeikis. And it tells the story of a night guard in an armored car company in the southeastern U.S. organizes one of the biggest bank heists in American history. So this is like a comedic take on the 1997 Loomis Fargo robbery. And this movie is something where if you are the target audience, this probably looks absolutely hilarious. If you love everything that Zach Galifianakis and Kristen Wiig and Owen Wilson does, this is probably right up your alley. Me, it doesn't really appeal to me very much. I've never been a big fan of Zach Galifianakis, even in The Hangover, which I think is probably his funniest role. I'm not over the moon about that character. Kristen Wiig and Leslie Jones and Kate McKinnon, those are, Kristen Wiig is more successful than the other 2, but they're obviously the 3/4 of the Ghostbusters cast, so, which Paul Feig movies and Ghostbusters included isn't really my cup of tea. Owen Wilson to me is very, very hit and miss. I love him in Wedding Crashers. I like him in You, Me, and Dupree, which is a movie that a lot of people don't care too much for. I like him in Zoolander. I hate him in pretty much everything else. And Jason Sudeikis I love a lot, but he's not got enough of a good track record under his belt to trust, movies that he picks. He's just kind of here and there. But like I said, if you're a Zach Galifianakis fan, if you're a big fan of Kristen Wiig and all this cast, this is probably something that's up your alley. I'm just curious if the quality of the movie reflects the development hell it went through. So September 30th, look out for the Masterminds finally coming out. Alright, the big one. Hacksaw Ridge, which is supposed to be coming out November 4th of this year. So this is the newest movie directed by the great Mel Gibson. Regardless of what you think about the guy and his personal life and, the anti-Semitism and all that kind of stuff, I'm not leaving all that out the door. I'm just talking about him as a director. He's awesome. And as an actor. And this movie stars Andrew Garfield, Sam Worthington, Hugo Weaving, Vince Vaughn, and Teresa Palmer. And it's based on a true story about a U.S. Army medic, Desmond T. Doss, played by Andrew Garfield, a Seventh-day Adventist, conscientious objector who refuses to bear arms, yet was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Truman for single-handedly saving the lives of over 75 of his comrades while under constant enemy fire during the brutal Battle of Okinawa in World War II. This movie looks fucking phenomenal. I hadn't heard a whole lot about it aside from just saying, okay, this is Mel Gibson's next movie. But this, to me, looks like it is Mel Gibson, Braveheart, like his return to form for something like that. Like this, the battle scenes look fucking awesome. I mean, visually, this movie looks like it's going to be awesome and gorgeous. And even though I like Andrew Garfield a lot, I don't jump on his dick like everybody else does about his job doing Spider-Man. I thought Tobey Maguire was better in pretty much every way. But I know I'm in the minority with that. But he is a guy that I'm intrigued by. I watched 99 Homes, and I didn't love the movie. I thought he did a pretty good job with it, though. But he looks like he's going to be really good in this. The thought of being in World War II and refusing to hold a weapon and fire a weapon, yet you volunteer to go to war. I mean, that in itself is some crazy shit. And, the fact that this is a true story is pretty amazing. So, aside from that, the cast is awesome. Sam Worthington is a guy he's kind of hit and miss with the movies that he picks, but he's one of those guys that now that he's kind of gotten off of that, the studio is trying to shove him down our throat as our new big movie star train. He does a lot of really, really good stuff in character roles. And, Hugo Weaving's been around forever. He's really good. Vince Vaughn, I've always believed that guy has really good dramatic acting in him. He just hasn't quite gotten the chance to show it yet. Unfortunately, I was hoping True Detective Season 2, which I've already been talking about, was going to kind of be his avenue into doing more of this. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out in his favor, but I'm curious to see what he does with this. And, Teresa Palmer's pretty good. I've seen her here and there. But I can't wait to see this movie. Mel Gibson directing this. I'm glad that he's directing again, and I really wish, I've said this again, I know that the guy in his personal life has done a lot of really fucked up things, and I know that he's really hated by a lot of people, but I miss the hell out of Mel Gibson. I love seeing that guy on screen, and I love him behind the director's chair. So, can't wait to see Hacksaw Ridge. The Great Wall. Now, this is supposed to be coming out February 17th of next year. It's directed by Yamao Zhang, who's the director of Hero and House of Flying Daggers. I probably mispronounced the shit out of that name. And this stars Matt Damon, Andy Lau, and Pedro Pascal. And the story is basically a mystery centered around the construction of the Great Wall of China and what they were building it to keep out. So it's going to be kind of a historic piece, but also kind of a fantasy sci-fi kind of thing. You can't really see what the monsters are. They look like dragons. So something along the lines of them building the Great Wall of China to keep out dragons. Now, the fact that Matt Damon is starring in it kind of intrigues me because he's not a guy who picks a lot of bad movies. But the release date doesn't give me any confidence. And I'm not a big fan of the kind of, Asian sci-fi type movies, kind of like Hero and House of Flying Daggers and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and all that kind of stuff. I'm not a big fan of those kinds of movies. So the premise of this doesn't really intrigue me a whole lot, and I can already see all the controversy coming with Matt Damon being the star of this movie. So I don't know if this is based off of some kind of a graphic novel or anything where there's a white guy in charge, or if this is just Matt Damon getting shoved in there so they can sell this off of his name. But I can already see people bitching that you're telling the story of the construction of the Great Wall of China and the main guy is a white dude. So I can already see the articles coming out for that. But anyway, if this is up your alley, February 17th, The Great Wall. The last trailer I have to talk about is The Edge of 17. Now, this is coming out September 30th, and the stars Haley Steinfeld, who is from True Grit, and Haley Lou Richardson, Blake Jenner, Woody Harrelson, and Kira Sedgwick. And it tells the story of the life of a high school junior Nadine, played by Steinfeld, is already at peak awkwardness when her all-star older brother Darian starts dating her best friend Krista. All at once, Nadine feels more alone than ever, until the unexpected friendship of a thoughtful boy gives her a glimmer of hope that things might just not be so terrible after all. Film also stars Kira Sedgwick as Nadine's well-meaning but ineffective mother, and Woody Harrelson as Nadine's history teacher, mentor, and reluctant sounding board. Now, surprising to me, this trailer actually looks really funny and relatable. Now, there's a ton of these coming-of-age, 17-year-old, 16-year-old, teenage girl, teenage boy movies that come out every single year. And very few of them are worth talking about more than, if you're that age and just want to go see a teenage movie. But this movie looks like it could be something that could surprise people. It could be by the numbers, or it could be something surprising like Perks of Wallflower. Woody Harrelson and Haley Steinfeld, the scenes that it shows in the trailer, they look like they have a lot of really good comedic chemistry. There's a lot of really funny scenes with her just burdening Woody Harrelson on his lunch break with all these, 17-year-old girl problems and stuff like that. But Surprisingly, I'm actually really interested in seeing this. I probably won't go see it in theaters. It's probably going to be something I watch later on, but I'm actually intrigued by this. So, The Edge of 17 coming out September 30th. Alright guys, we are in another month. This is August 1st, so we're going to be having our flashback segment on today's show. So this is for anybody that hasn't listened to my episode from last month. The first week of every month, on my first movie news episode, I do a flashback segment where I talk a little bit about movies that are turning 10 years old, 20 years old, and 30 years old this month. So starting off with 10-year-olds, coming out in 2006, we have The Descent, The Night Listener, Talladega Nights, World Trade Center, Step Up, Snakes on a Plane, Beer Fest, and Invincible all came out 10 years ago this month. So, the few that stick out to me, to this day, The Descent is one of the best horror movies out there. It's very different. It's about cave dwellers, or cave divers going in to this cave, and they find some ancient monsters, basically. So, if you haven't seen The Descent and you're a big fan of horror movies, definitely check that one out. Talladega Nights is, to me, still the funniest movie that Will Ferrell has led. Aside from Step Brothers, that's more of a collaboration between him and John C. Reilly. But this is the first time you really saw Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly's chemistry come to life. So Talladega Nights is a classic comedy to me. I laugh my ass off every time I watch that movie. That's one of my favorites. The Night Listener I remember only because I unfortunately rented it, and that was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I rented it basically on the intrigue of Robin Williams doing something dark. Every time he's done something off the walls, I've usually liked it. It was basically where he was this radio host, and he gets this call about this young boy who's dying of some disease, I think, and it ends up, he ends up trying to search for this kid because the kid disappears, and it's not a very good movie, so don't waste your time with it, but I do remember that one. World Trade Center, I think that was the last of the movies to come out whenever everybody was trying to greenlit every September 11th story they could find to make a big major motion picture out of it. Step Up, that's a pretty successful franchise. I think that's what introduced us to Channing Tatum. Snakes on a Plane, everybody knows that movie. It's one of those so bad that it's good movies. Tired of these motherfucking snakes on this motherfucking plane. So that was pretty funny. Not a great movie, but it has its moments. Beer Fest was the big movie that came out after Super Troopers. I've seen it once, it's okay. And Invincible I remember buying because I love Mark Wahlberg. It was basically where he's playing. I'm not a big sports fan, guys, so forgive me for not knowing the guy's name, but some kind of a quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles. But that was a decent movie. Movies turning 20 years ago, so coming out in 1996. We have Chain Reaction, Escape from LA, House Arrest, Jack, The Fan, Tales from the Crypt Bordello of Blood, The Island of Dr. Moreau, First Kid, and The Crow City of Angels. So, the ones that stick out to me, I do remember going to see Escape from LA with my dad. I've always heard the criticism that, it's basically just the same exact setup as Escape from New York, but, what can you expect from a sequel? So, Escape from LA is kind of a guilty pleasure. I remember House Arrest and Jack very well in my childhood. House Arrest was the movie with Jamie Lee Curtis and Kevin Pollak playing a couple that basically could never get along, and they were supposed to get divorced, and their two kids locked them in the basement and nailed the door shut, and until they start getting along, and eventually all the neighborhood kids hear about it, and they start bringing their parents, and it's a very funny 90s movie, and I could probably watch it today and still enjoy it. I don't know if it holds up as well if you've seen it now for the first time in 2016, but I have a lot of fond memories watching that movie, and I think it was one of the first movies I seen Jennifer Love Hewitt in. So I like House Arrest a lot. And the other one I remember a lot from my childhood was Jack. So that's the movie with Robin Williams where he plays, the kid with the gene disorder where he ages like 4 times too fast. So he's 10 years old, but he looks like he's 40. And that's a movie that I think was always pretty underrated by, Robin Williams fans. Everybody always talks about Patch Adams. Everybody always talks about Good Morning Vietnam. But, Jack was a really, really heartwarming movie by Robin Williams. And, a funny memory I have with that, I remember watching the movie with my dad whenever it first came out, and there's a basketball scene about halfway through the movie where he's playing basketball with all these 10-year-old kids, And, he's kicking all their asses, obviously. He's Robin Williams playing a bunch of 10-year-olds. And there's a scene where a kid goes up and he kind of like belly bumps the kid and knocks him out the way. And me and my dad tried to do that, and I remember I got knocked across the fucking room. So that's a memory that always comes up when I think about Jack. The Fan is a movie that not a lot of people like, but I've always felt it was underrated. Now, this is a movie starring Robert De Niro and Wesley Snipes. And Wesley Snipes is this really, really big new draft of I'm pretty sure he's a new draft, but he's a big baseball player that's new to this team. And Robert De Niro is basically like a psychotic fan of his. He's fixated on him, and as basically what the movie follows is as Robert De Niro's life starts spiraling out of control, his obsession with Wesley Snipes also starts spiraling out of control, and he starts compensating for his own life flaws by kind of taking on the responsibility of ensuring that Wesley Snipes is successful. So it's hard for me to describe without giving away plot details, but The Fan is a really cool movie. It's a really cool thriller, and it's always been underrated as far as I know. So if you like either of those actors, check out The Fan. It's a pretty cool movie. Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood. I never saw it. I've always heard it's not nearly as good as The Demon Knight. I think that was the last Tales from the Crypt movie that came out. The Island of Dr. Moreau, I haven't watched it since it came out. I remember it was basically where Val Kilmer goes on this island, and they're making animals and people, kind of like merging them together. Kind of weird. First Kid, another movie that I loved from my childhood, starring Sinbad, where he's a Secret Service agent and he gets assigned to watch over the son of the president. Very funny movie. And The Crow, City of Angels, I've never seen, but I believe that was the first sequel to The Crow that they started coming out with all these sequel/remakes after Brandon Lee died. Alright, moving on to the 30-year-olds. So these movies came out in 1986. We have Flight of the Navigator, Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, Howard the Duck, Stand By Me, The Transformers the Movie, that's the animated one, The Fly, Manhunter, and The Texas Chainsaw 2. So, what stick out to me, kind of I don't know if this is a good thing to admit or not, but I've never seen Flight of the Navigator. I know that a lot of people love that movie. Friday the 13th is one of the few horror franchises that I've never been a fan of. I like Jason as a character, and I've liked a few of the movies. The original and Part 2 I can watch, and I think Part 3 I've seen. I've seen the one, whatever one has Corey Feldman in it. I want to say it's Part 4. I've seen Jason Goes to Hell. That's not a very good one. I've seen Jason X. It's not a very good one. Freddy vs. Jason I love, and I was actually a really big fan of the remake, and I'm surprised that they never did a sequel to that. As successful as it was, they never really got on the ball with that. But never saw this one, Part 6, so I can't really speak on that one. Howard the Duck, I've never seen it, but I know that's kind of an iconic bomb. Stand By Me, one of my favorite movies ever. It was in my my show that I did on the 10 movies that should never be remade, and Stand By Me is an absolute classic. So, one of my favorite movies of all time. The Transformers the Movie, never saw it. The Fly. Now, this is a movie that I talked about a little bit when I was talking about our remakes bad. Now, The Fly is one of those few remakes where it's basically just the skeleton of the original movie, but they do something wildly different. Now, this was David Cronenberg, and Jeff Goldblum plays the main character, and he's doing this. He's developing this technology where you can teleport. So he has these teleporting pods, and he goes into it one time testing it, and a fly ends up into the pod. So he teleports to the other side, and whenever he comes out, he slowly starts merging. The fly's DNA merged with his. He slowly starts transforming into a fly. It's a very wicked, nasty movie, but it's a classic. So The Fly is cool. Manhunter. Now, this is a movie that I've never seen, but I pretty much know all the story beats to it because it was remade into Red Dragon. This was the first Hannibal Lecter movie to come out, and this is the only one that starred Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter. But there are people out there that swear that Manhunter is the shit, and Red Dragon is not nearly as good, but I only know the Red Dragon version of the story. But if you're a Hannibal Lecter fan, this is the first one that ever came out. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, I have seen parts of. Very, very weird movie. You know, if the first one wasn't weird enough, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is like a horror comedy almost. You know, you always see Dennis Hopper on the front of the case. That's pretty much what they advertise it on, is under his name. But this is one of those kind of cult classic movies that a lot of people swear by. But it's a very odd, weird, goofy, crazy movie. So for the little bit that I've seen of it, it's not really my kind of thing, but it is interesting that, you know, it's turning 30 years old now. So, all right, guys, those are our flashback movies. So a lot of really good ones on that list. Looks like we had some pretty busy months in August back in those 30 years ago, 20 and 10 years ago. But that pretty much concludes my show for this week, guys. I hope you enjoy it. Go ahead and like and subscribe below on SoundCloud or YouTube. Add any comments you have or questions. You know, I take viewer questions and I can compile them into a Q&A episode or just do them at the end of these movie news episodes. Leave any comments below on Facebook, YouTube, or SoundCloud. You can follow me on iTunes as well. Like I said, check out Abbott Skelding's podcast, The Creative Cohorts, and I will be on an upcoming episode of that. And I'm also planning on getting Abbott on my show here coming up soon. We'll probably do a top 5 collaboration or something like that. So look forward to that. And I will be back next week with some more movie news, and I will see you guys soon with this week's Top 5 episode.